Hello and welcome to the Varietal Show. If you've not been here before, you're on Varietal Literature's YouTube channel, which is a channel filled with Vancouver writers. And we do basically three things. On Tuesdays, we do storytelling. On Wednesdays, we have a book club for readers. And today, the Varietal Show is for those of you who enjoy doing a bit of writing yourself. Now, if you don't, you can also just hang out with us and throw in your own recommendations. Writing takes many forms. I'll be quarterbacking the majority of it, but if you just enjoy hanging out and making stories, that's what we're going to do tonight for about an hour. And if you are new here and you are not watching this live, check the description below because there should be timestamps and allow you to jump ahead in the video if you just want to hear what stories we came up with or skip the intro or whatever else. That's easy enough to do. Just click on the time code. But otherwise, thank you for being here, and let's see who's in the live chat, which is a thing you can join if you haven't already. I see we have Big Drew says, hello from Oregon. Let's write about a bean called coffee. And Gia says, good evening, early bird. It must be all that coffee. Rachel, who recommended this topic, says, I love this topic. So I think that's fitting. And Gia says, welcome back, Rachel. Yes, welcome back, Rachel. I hope you're feeling better. I know you weren't feeling so great last week. Your absence was felt. So I guess the question to open this, because we are talking about coffee, I'll explain how this is going to work later. Those who've been here before, who did the writing a potato session, understand what we're going to do, but I'll explain it a little bit. Again, if you're not watching live, you can click below and jump there. But I want to open with a question, which is, A, do you like coffee? And if you do, how do you like your coffee? For myself, I like cream. I'll take milk if I have to. Not really into sugar too much. In a regular cup of coffee, I like dark coffee, some cream, maybe heat it up, maybe latte. But I can drink coffee black if it's quite good. But rare that coffee is ever that good. So, for the most part, coffee is a little bit overcooked or in one way or another, and so the cream dulls it out a bit. But I will admit, I also like my coffee milkshakes, which they call iced coffee, but let's face it, it's coffee milkshakes. Big Drew says, to your Hemingway quote. Yes, my opening Hemingway quote. For those who might have missed it, it's never think that war, no matter how necessary nor how justified, is not a crime. Big Drew says, historically, war has proven pretty successful. Violence is one of the only real resolutions, so it kind of is the answer. Some random comedian I listened to recently, depending on what you think the question is. And I'm not sure that Hemingway fought in wars voluntarily. In wars he wasn't drafted to be in. I don't know that he's saying war doesn't provide a certain answer. He's saying it's a crime to start a war. And I think he's got a point. Much more of a gamble in peace. But it's a gamble worth taking. Big Drew says, I'm not far off coffee. I'm assuming fan of coffee. Light roast with lots of sweet flavors. Rachel says, yes, I rarely drink coffee. Got a bunch of people who don't drink coffee. So if you drink coffee, please join the chat. I don't want to be the only one who drinks coffee here. So let's not waste any more time because I am wasting an abnormal amount of time here. We'll do a real quick Left on Red. Super brief. We have for the last few weeks recommended that you read The Broken Places by Francis Peck, which I have a picture of it here. We recommend that you read this book here, The Broken Places by Francis Peck. The reason I'm recommending it is on Wednesday nights at 6:30 we have the Big Van Book Club, and we are currently reading it because she is a Vancouver author and an acquaintance of mine. And we've been going through the chapters, and next week is the end of that book. We will do our final discussion. So if you haven't joined in yet, it's a good time to do it. It's a book you could easily read in a week. You know, you'd have to do a good bit of reading. It's about 300 something pages. Yeah, I think that you guys might enjoy it more than you expect. It definitely helps to tune in with the book club. I think that having a place to discuss it and hear other people's thoughts has increased my enjoyment of the book, and I suspect you would too. So I highly recommend that. Which means it is time for Lit Games. Big Drew says we could go back and forth all night. Loss of life in any case is a travesty. I think that's a big part of his point. I personally don't think war solves any problems. And I think history is on my side with that evidence. I think there's a lot of people that recontextualize history after the fact to try and make it look more noble than it was. And two videos I can recommend rather than turn this into Rory's historical debate hour is it's a multi-part documentary about the Vietnam War. It came out in 2017 by Ken Burns. I think that does a remarkable job of showing the futility and pointlessness of war. And the other I would recommend is a book. It's a long essay. It's 2.5 hours, unfortunately, but it's a spoken essay from a YouTuber called Sean, spelled with a U and an A, Shaun, on the Hiroshima bombing. And I think that does a really good job of contextualizing how the bombing did nothing and was recontextualized later for political reasons to be seen as the only option. It's a very eye-opening essay that's very well researched. I recommend those two things because they do a better job of articulating my point. But that's not why you're here. You're here for Lit Games, which stands for Literature Games. Literature games, I don't know. They're not really games. They're sort of fun of writing live together. And the one that we're doing tonight is the writing a coffee bean. And we did this before with writing a potato, and I'll tell you what the origin was for the potato, and it works for the coffee bean here too, which is basically coffee has like a long history, not as long as the potato. Coffee hasn't, because coffee requires you to do like discover that it does stuff and roast it, and there's a lot of steps that had to be worked out. So it doesn't go far back as potatoes, which basically define human existence, or at least root vegetables of some sort. But in the same way, it's always there in history. And as a result, I think it's interesting to basically like Pixar certain things. I don't know, is that a verb that we'll get to? When we're Pixaring something, it's basically writing a world from its perspective and building a lore around it being more sentient than a thing. So we had like French fry historical families and gods and stuff with the potato show. And so what we're doing here is with coffee. And I was a little worried that coffee was less dynamic than potatoes. But what I did was I went to the Wikipedia page. Let me get you there. Big Drew says, I'm not a warmonger. I think war is a way of poorly endowed men to measure their appendages. You know, what is so depressing about war is it's simply a negotiation tactic. And I think that's the worst part of it. But I found a couple of things that I thought was badass about coffee. So first of all, the name, I'm not going to read it all. This is from the Wikipedia page. I'm not like some genius about everything or anything. There's a bunch of things about what root word did it come from. Coffee as a word seems to have come from the Dutch, but they get it from, coffee comes from Ethiopia originally. That much everybody seems to be able to agree with. And it got exported to what was then called Arabia. I don't think that is the case anymore. But anyways, I really like this closing sentence on its etymology. It says, according to this analysis, the feminine form kwawa, probably pronouncing that wrong, also meaning dark in color, dulling, dry, sour, was likely chosen to parallel the feminine khamir, or wine, and originally meant the dark one. And the idea of like coffee having such a smoldery name, the dark one, I really liked. Carrying on from that, there are legendary accounts, and you know me, I like legends, and I wanted to read you guys at least this first account because it was really fun. It says there are several legendary accounts on the origin of the consumption of coffee. According to one legend, ancestors of today's Caficho people in the kingdom of Kaffa were the first to recognize the energizing effect of the coffee plant. Remember, this is a legend, so it's probably not true. One account involves a 9th century Ethiopian goat herder, Kaldi, who, noticing the energizing effects when his flock nibbled on the bright red berries of a certain bush, chewed on the fruit himself. His exhilaration prompted him to bring the berries to a monk in a nearby monastery. But the monk disapproved of their use and threw them into a fire, which formed an enticing aroma that billowed about, causing other monks to come and investigate. The roasted beans were quickly raked from the embers, ground up and dissolved in hot water, yielding the world's first cup of coffee. The second account, similar, says that in the 13th century, a Moroccan Sufi mystic, Gothel Akbar Nuruddin Abu al-Hassan el-Shadil, sorry if I mispronounced that, was traveling in Ethiopia, the legend goes. He observed birds of unusual vitality, whatever that means. I mean, I guess they're excitable, feeding on berries, and upon trying the berries, experiencing the same vitality. And it goes on to say that a version of it where they tried to roast them to improve the flavor, and then they tried to boil them to soften them up from the roasting, and then you get the cups of coffee. But what was interesting to me, other than those legends, was it also was used for a while to help with prayers, keep people awake with prayers in Islam and so on. Although there was a time, I don't think it is anymore, but there was a time that it was considered halal, and then there was a time that it wasn't. I'm not sure where it is now, to be honest. I didn't get that far, but there's some stuff for us to jump off with, which means I'm sort of building on this idea to read the copy again from it. In the beginning there was wine sweet and free, but another drink was made, the dark one, the bitter tyrant, coffee. Which is what I'm going to put here now. And that is where we will start. In the beginning there was wine. It was sweet and free. I see Big Drew's already getting to it. So my version of this tale is going to play on the idea that coffee is kind of dark and bitter and mysterious and emerges from the flames. So as a sort of antithesis to the sweet and free ways of wine. So let's see what we can create from that. The dark one, the bitter tyrant, the one they called coffee. It was wine that ruled the valley for many generations. It nurtured its young grapes on the fertile soils between the sands. Ooh. Will coffee have a family chat? And if so, what does that family look like? What defines the family of coffee? The first family of coffee, I should say. It nurtured its young grapes on the fertile soils between the sands, destined to grow plump and mature in the bottle, blown by the many craftsmen of the great old town. But there were those who heard tales of another thing that could be drunk. It was said to erase the magic of wine, to draw from the body all its distractions, and make one impenetrable to the whims of sleep. Oh, everybody's writing tonight. I see that Big Drew says, I'm but a lonely mug high upon a shelf in the dark of my cabinet. A sound emanates from the clock in the far room. I hear the footsteps of my captor clumsily dragging down the hall. Oh, cool. It's like a horror story. Dawn breaks as my cupboard door opens, and I take my seat beside the machine who is soon to bring my friend to life. Piping hot, my dear Kawa fills my empty vessel, searing hot boost of life comes over me, and then another friend, this time Malawi, the coconut cream, dances, oh, that's a brand, with Kawa until the two become intertwined as one. Our captor sips my friend's sweet nectar before casting me downward into the sink. I do think my coffee should involve some sacrificing. Rachel says, the dad was the darkest of roasts. His son, not wanting to be as rich in life, chose to be lighter so as not to draw as much attention. Ooh. How about, okay, Rachel, I like this idea, but how about instead of it being the dad and the son, how about it's two brothers? Because that's some classic, like, mythology arrangement. He had two sons, one of lighter roast, and one who did nothing but darken his ways. GS says, doing the Pixaring thing in a more literal way, Mr. Bean had been on the counter for 5 years. The cosmetologist never refreshed the supply of Mr. Seabean's delight. Retirement seemed far off. Oh, I'm curious what Mr. Bean will do. Rachel agrees with the sons. I'm getting excited about this epic. I feel like I'm not going to be able to finish it, but last time we wrote a bunch of stories, but this feels like it's going to consume my whole time. It was said to erase the magic of wine, to draw from the body all its distractions, and make one impenetrable to the whims of sleep. Many feared it. It was said in the lands beyond, it had infested and run away the joys of wine, eventually frightening the holy folk so deeply it was banned and declared haram, I think is the term for it. Big Drew says, sort of a Cain and Abel take on coffee roast. I mean, I guess so, yeah. I mean, Cain and Abel isn't the only sort of brother arrangement in mythologies, but it's definitely the one we probably know, most people know the best. GS continues, then a dark pall fell upon the department store in the form of a pandemic. Oh! After which Mr. Bean was tucked underneath the counter, seemingly forgotten, left to collect dust. Oh, well, now I'm engaged. I am interested. Joys of wine. Eventually frightening the holy folk so deeply, it was banned and declared haram. But its magic could not be forgotten. And so it was passed through the alleys and the small coves and high and hot rocks were filled with their red berries. The magic of the Dark One was slipping between the cities and nesting in those crevices. It was the first cult of men, the baristas, as they dubbed themselves. That sailed in search of the forbidden foe to wine. Wine. At first, wine lounged upon its throne in cackling mockery of all that coffee could do. Slipping the right berries and bottles to the right folk kept the wine hegemony as titanic as it was insurmountable. But the baristas knew the great berry would soon grow as was prophesied. Prophesied, is that right? Oh, I see. Rachel is doing character work for me. I like this. Okay, let's get to that. And so it was that a grand berry, as large as any inn or castle, any inn or home, let's say, grew up from a mountain slope. From it burst the Dark One himself. A pale figure confused as a babe. The baristas had prepared for this day, and with rope and camel dragged the Grand One to a great iron barrel above the volcano. It had been constructed with smuggled goods over near a century. Let's just go from this one. For 40 days and 40 nights, the baristas worked the roaster, rolling the Dark One about and about, and ignoring its cries, for coffee was a brutal thing to realize. Over half the men collapsed with exhaustion and never rose again, thirsting in their last moments for coffee. Just a drop? When the Grand Bean emerged from the smoldering veil, of pitch black, it towed behind it his kid. So let's see what Rachel says here. I think we're up to 3 kids now, aren't we? Because I see there's dark, medium, and light, and I think that works. Dark had more of a temper, and its caffeination affected the town in anger and excitement. Ooh, I like that there's like a mythos to the different effects. His brothers, medium and light roast, knew their brother's effect on the town and sought to gain confidence with their less intenseness. Maybe they're more subtle, they're less warriors. Their mother, Mocha, was in favor of the 2 younger sons. Java, their father, however, still supported the caffeination of his first son. I get it. Rather than coronation, the caffeination. That's great. I'm going to steal pieces of that, for sure. But I see that Mr. Bean's story is continuing. The usual bustle of coiffed, dressed-up ladies and suited men disappeared. No more heady perfumes, each competing for airspace. Wow, that was one good thing about the pandemic. Mr. Bean started to regret not being brewed like his brave relatives. The days and nights dragged on. In an unscented dark world on his shelf, he began to doubt his purpose in life. This is very Pixar. Start tremendously bleak for a children's show. That's exactly what Pixar would do. Okay, when the Grand Bean emerged from the smoldering veil of pitch black smoke, it towed behind it 3 sons. The first had run from the burner on the 10th day. And was the lightest in color. It had a sweet voice and would be known as the mellowest to contend with in the family. The second had run from the burner on the 20th day. He was neither as dark as his father, nor as light as his younger brother, but was a caramel bean. Balanced and gregarious, but known to smite a true enemy if he must. GS says, thank you. You said Pixar, so I'm trying. I think you're nailing the tone on Pixar, GS. Keep it up. But known to smite a true enemy if he must. The third bean, however, was a thing unto himself. For on the 30th day, his father said, "It is now. We must leave, before we darken to a bitter way." But this bean said, "Then ye may depart, father, and mingle with the wines so sweet. But as for I shall stay longer." And though the father questioned why, the son offered no clarity or word of comfort. On the 33rd day, the father announced again that a minute longer would render them foul and unwanted. They must leave. But the son said, this is the great thing about fairy tales, you can just reuse stuff. "Then ye may depart, father, and mingle with the wine so sweet. But as for I shall stay longer yet." The father was made to look weak by his son should he leave. And so he kept to the burner a bit longer and darkened even further. On the 36th day, the father said, "One can be too bitter, too dark of heart, to even be loved. We must depart this place for a second longer, and we will be in ash upon the lake." But the son said, "Then ye may depart, father, and mingle with the wine so sweet. But as for I shall stay longer yet." Finally, on the 39th day, the father said, "I shall leave tomorrow, and not a day later. This path you take and have taken shall make you bitter, and no one shall want you." It was then that the son changed his mind, and on the 40th day he emerged, dark and smoldering, with an odor that would haunt his enemies and bear down comfort on his friends. So here's what I'm thinking. I'll just be open about it rather than being secretive. I think there should be a little character arc. I think we can it's going to be a little clunky. We can jam it out. But what I want, since you're so good with characters, Rachel, is I want to know about the cream that's going to soften Dark's flavor. Now, Wine stood haughty and proud over all the lands, and it was the wish of the baristas that this grand dark one and his sons would liberate these towns from the whims of wine and fill them with the bitterness of productivity. By the way, if you like stories like this is essentially what Fireside Fairy Tales is. It's not about coffee, though. The lightest son. What's a light brew name? Blonde? Let's call him Blonde. Blonde. Was a great poet who wrote such wonderful and sweet verses that all the softest folk in the land came to hear them, and through his words he besmirched the legacies of wine, often painting it a fool. Well, this did not end wine's hegemony. It did weaken its hold and frustrate the great old bottle on the throne. But wine's decanters advised they do not respond, for a response would legitimize. Why can I not remember how to write this? Is that really it? That looks like too many eyes. For a response would legitimize the poems in the public's eyes. So wine sat with its anger amongst its cautious and patient decanters. Big Drew trying to get banned again. It says, like the way spam chat does. Naps are good. Ivermectin. Advise they wouldn't ask for the medium roasted sun, Colombia, would take the tact of a politician. Ran in elections in a smaller district against some fierce and at times violent opposition. But while he won his seat with a firm hand and a sweet voice, his calls for fairness and the ways of coffee were often ignored. The decanters said, "Let him have his seat, for to oppose them in this way is to invite war." See, people saying the chat is screwing up. That's a shame if that's the case. But dark roast. What's the name of a dark roast? The Colombia is generally medium roasted. Oh no, you lost a paragraph, GS? Oh, that's the worst. Let's see, I'm gonna catch up on Big Drew's story a bit here. Teacups had always felt inferior to me, but I was made to feel inferior to the vessels of milk, water, and many a Friday night's whiskey. Deep down, though, I knew I was the hero. I brought life to each day. Oh, I see. I reached for my coffee, a rare treat, on a rainy, gray autumn morn. What power, I thought, feeling the electricity like jolt of energy as it surged through my body. It felt unstoppable. I felt brave. I felt heroic. Back up the stairs I ran, and in my closet I found an article never seen by my eyes. I donned my newfound attire, and I was Mr. Macchiato, protector of the bean, flicker of foes. Rachel has a good one. Rachel, you're doing great. I don't know how much I should just write most of my book on stream and make you guys come up with names for everything for me, because names are the hardest thing to do. But the dark roasted bean, espresso, the conqueror, knew that change was a river of blood and wine, and shattering the old was the only way to build the new. So against the advice of his father, the counsel of his brothers, and the pleas of the baristas, he assembled a great army of coffee beans in a secret I want to say farm, but that's really bad. In a secret crop. He rode high and was brutal. Those that did not bend the knee and swear fealty were found smothered in his bitter wake. He called upon the weakest in every rebel city to face the test of beans. A kiln of great size that he would throw others into. Of course, only his troops would survive and emerge ever more bitter and dark of heart. None chose willingly to walk this bitter way, for it was much too foul for the sweet tongues of a wine-soaked people. But he pressed on and built a tyranny of espresso. Let's say a tyrant rule of espresso, hated and feared by all. None could reach him, and all tasted his bitter ways. Then, in an act of treachery that could only be counted as decency, his own brothers and father conspired to abandon him to the desert. It was a swift raid, and though they were meant to crush him, he was much too hard, and they much too sweet to do it. So he was left to wander. Alone and without means to inflict his power. After 10 days, he vowed to hold his hand until a fair court Victory says they could clash with a ragtag band of rogue Javas from Costa Rica. They could find a network of light-roasted transplants now hailing from Seattle. How did we not work Starbucks into it? I only have a few minutes, so I can't do anything too vast, but I feel like there is a lot of room for more events of this epic. After 10 days, he vowed, Espresso vowed, to hold his hand until a fair court confirmed guilt rather than slaughter anyone he distrusted. But alas, sand still gave way to miserable sand. After 20 days, Espresso, the Conqueror, swore to surrender the lands of the unwilling that he had expanded upon, if only he were to see a friend again. Big Drew says, you missed my lead-in, all in caps. The different coffees are foes of pirate coffees from Sumatra. I mean, I'll just write about pirates. I gotta be honest. The story I'm writing now, it was originally supposed to be a pirate story. It is in no way a pirate story anymore, which is a shame because I really just wanted to write about pirates. If only he were to see a friend again. But alas, Stan still gave way to hot, lonely sand. Let's say lonely sand. On the 30th day, Espresso, the Conqueror, swore to the skies that he would accept a life of servitude and make every apology he must make. If only he were to see a friendly face again. And on that day, he came upon the land of milk and honey. Oh. A pasture of mooing cows and humming bees. And there he met pasture of mooing cows and humming bees, and there he met the sweet Big Drew says the land of cliches. Nah, it's we've been making Abraham references the whole time. Or not, it's Abraham, right? Yeah, Abraham, who goes to the land of milk and honey. This is a friggin' Bible story is what this is. And there he met the sweet, cool, and tall lady Creamery. For 10 days, she turned from him for his bitter waft. But on the 10th day, he said, "My lady Creamery, I can see in you the balance I lack, and in your children too, the sweetness I lost. Make us whole as you will." And so they returned, a family of lattes. And after much proving of his change, was found to be the noblest being, and was caffeinated for many peaceful years. Rachel says, I think I'm just a little more used to our input being used. Well, it kind of depends. In general, I try to use input more, but it depends on if I think, like, I have an idea that's going to get done. Okay. I think everybody here has witnessed that sometimes Rory just disappears into his own head. So, GS says suddenly... Whoop, wait. Continues, one morning a cosmetologist remarked to her co-worker that masks were no longer required, and soon after the familiar heady dusk once more. Left, but the sweet voice thanked her and lifted the cup to her lovely nose. And I guess I should read Big Drew's lead-in, which was, how about a pirate tale about three brothers called the Sons of Sumatra, forging their own path as they roam the seas in search of the best seasonings, salts, and mugs, pillaging along the way. I think I'd read that book. Hell yeah. All right. Well, the coffee bean. If you're coming to this section, it's because you skipped ahead. But we did a lot of stories actually today. GS had a sort of Pixar-y story going on, so you can check the chat for that. Big Drew had a hero's story and a little bit of writing from the perspective. And this story was written with a lot of help from Rachel, who came up with the core idea of it, really. It's just called The Coffee Bean. And its intro is, in the beginning there was wine, it was sweet and free. But another drink was made, the dark one, the bitter tyrant, the one they called coffee. It was wine that ruled the valleys for many generations. It nurtured its young grapes on the fertile soils between the sands, destined to grow plump and mature in the bottles blown by the many craftsmen of the great old town. But there were those who heard tales of another thing. Oh. Rachel says, we just had a huge gap in streaming. You did? Well, that's weird because it's fine on this end. I wonder if it's doing that thing. Sometimes YouTube does a thing where it just basically doesn't broadcast, but then the playback it's there, and I don't know why. It was wine that ruled the valleys for many generations. It nurtured its young grapes on the fertile soils between the sands, destined to grow plump and mature in the bottles blown by the many craftsmen of the great old town. But there were those who heard tales of another thing that could be drunk. It was said to erase the magic of wine, to draw from the body all its distractions, and make one impenetrable to the whims of sleep. Many feared it. It was said in the lands beyond it had infested and run away the joys of wine, eventually frightening the holy folk so deeply that it was banned and declared haram. But its magic could not be forgotten, and so it was passed through the alleys, and the small coves in high and hot rock were filled with their red berries. The magic of the Dark One was slipping between the cities and nesting in those crevices. It was the first cult of men, the baristas, as they dubbed themselves, that sailed in search of the forbidden foe to wine. At first, wine lounged upon its throne, in cackling mockery of all that coffee could do. Slipping the right berries and bottles to the right folk kept the wine hegemony as titanic as it was insurmountable. But the baristas knew the great berry would soon grow as was prophesied. And so it was that a granberry as large as any inn or home grew up from a mountain slope. From it burst the Dark One himself, a pale figure confused as a babe. The baristas had prepared for this day, and with rope and camel dragged the Grand One to a great iron barrel above the volcano. It had been constructed with smuggled goods over near a century. For 40 days and 40 nights, the baristas worked the roaster, rolling the Dark One about and ignoring its cries, for coffee was a brutal thing to realize. Over the half, the men collapsed with exhaustion and never rose again, thirsting in their moments for coffee. Just a drop? When the Grand Bean emerged from the smoldering veil of pitch-black smoke, it towed behind it 3 suns. The first had run from the burner on the 10th day and was the lightest in color. It had a sweet voice and would be known as the mellowest to contend with in the family. The second bean had run from the burner on the 20th day. He was neither as dark as his father nor as light as his younger brother, but was a caramel bean, balanced and gregarious, but known to smite a true enemy if he must. The third bean, however, was a thing unto himself, for on the 30th day his father said, "It is now we must leave, before we darken to a bitter way." But this bean said, "Then ye may depart, father, and mingle with the wines so sweet. But as for I shall stay longer yet." And though the father questioned why, the son offered no clarity or word of comfort. On the 33rd day, the father announced again that a minute longer would render them foul and unwanted. They must leave. But the son said, "Then ye may depart, father, and mingle with the wine so sweet. But as for I shall stay longer yet." The father was made to look weak by his son should he leave, so he kept to the burner a bit longer, and darkened even farther. On the 36th day, the father said, "One can be too bitter, too dark of heart to be loved." So we must depart this place for a second longer, and we will be an ash upon the lake. But the son said, Then ye may depart, father, and mingle with the wine so sweet, but as for I shall stay longer yet. Finally, on the 39th day, the father said, I shall leave tomorrow and not a day later. This path you take and have taken shall make you bitter, and no one shall want you. It was then that the son changed his mind, and on the 40th day he emerged dark and smoldering with an odor that would haunt his enemies and bear down comfort on his friends. Now wine stood haughty and proud over all the lands, and it was the wish of the baristas that this grand dark one and his sons would liberate these towns from the whims of wine and fill them with the bitterness of productivity. The lightest son, Blonde, was a great poet who wrote such wonderful and sweet verses that all the softest folk in the land came to hear them. And through his words he besmirched the legacies of wine, often painting it a fool. While this did not end wine's hegemony, it did weaken its hold on the state and frustrate the great old bottle on the throne. But wine's decanters advise they do not respond, for a response would legitimize the poems in the public's eyes. So wine sat with anger amongst its cautious and patient decanters. The medium-roasted son, Columbia, would take the tact of a politician, ran in elections in a smaller district against some fierce and at times violent opposition. But while he won his seat with a firm hand and a sweet voice, his calls for fairness and the ways of coffee were often ignored. The decanters said, let him have his seat, for to oppose them in this way is to invite war. But the dark-roasted bean, Espresso the Conqueror, knew that change was a river of blood and wine. Shattering the old was the only way to build the new. So against the advice of his father, the counsel of his brothers, and the plea of the baristas, he assembled a great army of coffee beans in a secret crop. He rode high and was brutal. Those that did not bend the knee and swear fealty were smothered in his bitter wake. He called upon the weakest in every rebel city to face the test of the beans, a kiln of great size that he would throw others into. Of course, only his troops would survive and emerge ever more bitter and dark of heart. None chose willingly to walk this bitter way, for it was much too foul for the sweet tongues of a wine-soaked people. But he pressed on and built a tyrant rule of espresso, hated and feared by all. None could reach him, and all tasted his bitter ways. Then, in an act of treachery that could only be counted as decency, his own brothers and father conspired to abandon him to the desert. It was a swift raid, and though they were meant to crush him, he was much too hard and they much too sweet to do it. So he was left to wander alone and without means to inflict his power. After 10 days, Espresso the Conqueror vowed to the skies to hold his hand until a fair court confirmed guilt rather than slaughter anyone he distrusted. But alas, sand still gave way to miserable sand. After 20 days, Espresso the Conqueror swore to surrender the lands of the unwilling that he expanded upon, if only he were to see a friend again. But alas, sand still gave way to lonely sand. On the 30th day, Espresso the Conqueror swore to the skies that he would accept a life of servitude and make every apology he must make if only he were to see a friendly face again. And on that day he came upon the land of milk and honey, a pasture of mooing cows and humming bees, and there he met the sweet, cool, and tall Lady Creamery. For 10 days she turned from him for his bitter waft, but on the 10th day he said, My Lady Creamery, I can see in you the balance I lack, and in your children too the sweetness I lost. Make us whole as you will. And so they returned, a family of lattes, and after much proving of his change, was found to be the noblest bean, and was caffeinated for many peaceful years. I think I lost everyone on this. That's okay. Big Drew says, I have no idea what this is about. This is about the legendary beans family, the originating beans. GS says this is a series. Well, I'm sorry that it cut out. I did wonder why at times it felt like chat wasn't there, but that explains it. That's all right. We got the time. I don't know what I'm doing next week. By the way, I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it's about the origin of a coffee dynasty is what it is. To take us back to where I started, I really liked the origin of it as a... Oh, Big Drew says, look up, there's a funny ending. At the end of the story, the barista shouts out, Scott, despite my name clearly being Doug, and I receive the incorrect order and walk off begrudgingly. Yeah, I just really like the idea that the origin of the word is the dark one. That makes it sound like this great dynasty that came up, and that it was specifically chosen in contrast to wine. Well, anyways, yeah. Sometimes these stories are silly, and most part they are, but if you haven't been here very long, you should know that they're not always silly. Some of them, I mean, it's still quite at its core silly. Some of them are just sort of stories, honestly. All right. Well, despite some hiccups, I didn't read the best part apparently, and there's a lot of chat here. I'm looking. I don't see another part. I might do something more gamified next week because we've been doing kind of chill stuff for a while. Maybe your comment got eaten, or maybe it's not being displayed, but the next one I have is you saying that you don't know what my story was about. I might do something because we have our dice rolling one. I mean, those are definitely a gamble because they don't always work out. Yeah, I don't have anything immediately below walk off begrudgingly, Big Drew. It's not displaying for me. Sorry. But I don't know. We'll see how the week goes. I can't remember. Actually, next week might be pre-recorded. What is the date next week? No, the week after will need to be pre-recorded because I'll be at a book release. But anyways, this is rambling. I've been Rory. Thank you to everybody who joined me in chat. And oh, I see there were some recommendations for balls. And then Rachel is saying I wasn't trying to be crude. I didn't think you were. But I've had Drew here enough to know what he's saying. Repost it, Drew. It's just not there. I don't know why. I don't know why it got eaten, but repost it. Give me the real ending. But I will, I'll be back next week. We can do more silliness. I'll go for more silly next week because obviously this week got more serious and long. I liked my story. I will say that. But I understand it's not as fun. Yeah, with the gaps in YouTube, Rachel says it was hard. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. YouTube sometimes just has problems. The last time this happened, it was literally just a problem with YouTube that apparently a lot of people had. Well, before it happens again, I've been Rory. Here's to a better week next week. Thank you to everybody who came by. Rachel, Drew, GS, thank you for all your contributions. And I'll get out of here before it cuts me out again. See you next week.